Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Thanks for tuning in to another new episode of The Lager Line, served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing, their beer developed in collaboration with the Houston Rockets. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. Joined on this Thursday, August 17th, the NBA's official schedule release day for the 2023-24 NBA season. Joined by my good friend, co-host out of Portugal, Paulo Alves. Paulo, you ready to talk NBA schedule?
I'm going to talk about Embiid.
Yeah. Let's not bury the lead. We will get to the schedule. I know it was released today, but look, we know every year there is some intrigue as to the ordering. I think it's noteworthy that the Rockets got a slightly softer than usual start, at least compared to the last couple of years, where it was very difficult out of the gate. This time, 7 of the first 9 are at home, and the 2 road games are against the Magic and Spurs, 2 other rebuilding teams. So Ime Udoka does have a chance to get his new look Rockets off to a fast start. Hopefully he's able to do that, and that could build a lot of momentum for the rest of the season, in which the Rockets are hoping to take a leap forward. But for the most part, the schedule is what it is. You play Eastern Conference teams twice. You play most of the Western Conference teams 4 times, a few of them just 3. There is the new in-season tournament, although we talked about that in one of our recent episodes already. We knew who the Rockets were going to go up against in that as well. We knew what their group is for that. So at the end of the day, it's just about setting the dates. And while that's fun to start putting these on your calendar, Sunday, October 29th is the Rockets home opener against the Golden State Warriors. That should be a ton of fun. Regular season opener, as mentioned, against Paolo Banchero and the Orlando Magic on the 25th of October. That's a Wednesday. But look, a lot of this is just sort of routine. We know who they're going to play. It's just a matter of when. And so we'll talk about it. There are a few things of note, but we're going to do that on the back half of today's show. I want to lead talking about, as Paulo said, Joel Embiid, because courtesy of Kelly Iko of The Athletic, longtime beat writer covering the Rockets and the NBA there, we got a very interesting nugget. I'm going to read you the quote that he said on the Athletic NBA show, that's their podcast, talking about what if Joel Embiid asked for a trade from Philadelphia, where clearly the situation is very much crazy. James Harden has been asking out for weeks. This week he put Gerald Morey on blast, and Joel Embiid, even though he's the MVP of the league, he's also 29 years old now. He's not getting any younger. The 76ers, if anything, they're getting further from a title, with James Harden having 1 foot out the door, and apparently the Sixers couldn't get anything for him on the trade market. That's why now they're going through this song and dance and threatening to bring him to training camp, because they couldn't trade him for what they wanted to earlier this offseason. And so with Embiid at 29, he's at an age where he doesn't need to necessarily win a championship immediately, but he at least conceivably could have a path over the next few years, and it's increasingly difficult to see that happening in Philadelphia. So people are speculating about, with James Harden already asking out of Philadelphia, is it going to be much longer until Joel Embiid does as well? He does have a 4-year contract that is just kicking in, but at the same time, look, that was the same situation with Kevin Durant and Brooklyn a year ago, and he asked out and ultimately got out by the deadline. So people are wondering when the other shoe is going to drop with Joel Embiid, and if and when it does, here's what Kelly said. Another team to watch is Houston because of the bond between Joel and Ime Udoka. Maybe in the next year or so, because obviously if Joel stays this season and plays it out, that's one thing. But moving forward, I think New York and Houston are the 2 teams to watch if Joel said, I want to leave too. Now, the Knicks have been reported for some time. Embiid is an East Coast guy, or at least has been since he joined the NBA a few years ago and was drafted high in the first round by the Sixers. Obviously, the Knicks are one of the flagship franchises. The question there is whether New York has enough assets, and Philadelphia may not want to deal with them being a division rival from less than 100 miles away. Houston, that's new, but there is a relationship between Joel and Ime Udoka. And before we get into the pros and cons, from a Rockets perspective of whether they should do this, because even though Embiid is the MVP, he's also 29 years old. He's going to turn 30 next March. That's not in timeline alignment with how the Rockets are currently constructed with regards to when we think they're going to be contending for championships. So even though he's the MVP, there are legitimate questions you can ask as to should you go after him, and if so, how much should you offer, and so on and so forth. But before we get into the pros and cons, I want to talk about the feasibility and why I actually do think that it's feasible. First off, when you look at it from Embiid's perspective, some people might say, look, why would he consider a rebuilding team like the Rockets that's had the worst record in the Western Conference for 3 straight years? Well, for starters, these Rockets are not those Rockets. They have added veterans this offseason with Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, Jeff Green. They should be a better team. You have Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün entering year 3. Your young guys are getting better. So just because the Rockets have been bad the last few years, it doesn't mean that that's reflective of the current state of the team. More importantly, as Kelly said, it's the relationship between Joel Embiid and Ime Udoka. Ime was an assistant with Philadelphia in the 2019 to 2020 season. And by all accounts, there seems to be a very close bond there. I saw earlier this year Joel liking tweets once Ime was hired by the Rockets. A month ago, Ime was actually at Joel's wedding. There seems to be a very tight bond there. And honestly, Houston is on the up and up. While it wouldn't be a day one contender if Embiid somehow arrived, don't think it's going to be imminently. More on that in a second. Look, there is a lot to like. You do have Fred VanVleet, a guy who's in almost perfect age and contractual alignment with Joel. You do have some promising young players that are getting better, and you have a proven head coach in Ime who's been to the NBA Finals before, and Houston is a lucrative destination. Should also note that Joel Embiid has a relationship with Hakeem Olajuwon. He's talked about that as something important in his developing NBA years. So there's a lot of ties between Embiid and Ime Udoka, and just because the Rockets aren't a contender day one, again, while Joel is a bit advanced in terms of his age, he's 29. It's not like he has to win a ring in the next year or two. There is a bit more time. So he's not joining a day one contender. As long as it's a team that has a path over the next, I'd say, 5 years or so, then that should be of interest to him relative to a situation in Philadelphia where it's not just that they're not at the front of the list for title contenders next season. It's that it looks like on paper Philadelphia is a situation that's only going to be a slow decay moving forward. Even if you take away some of the crazy stuff that's happening now and the drama, look, it's an older roster. There's not a lot of cap space. There's not a lot of draft equity coming in. So it just feels like a situation where they've peaked and it's only going to get worse, as opposed to the Rockets that are on the upswing. So Joel, he's advanced, but it's not like he's so old that he has to be next season or bust. It's not to that extent. So because of that, I could see the appeal. It's a good market. It's a franchise that's on the upswing. He trusts the head coach, which has a lot to do with where superstars in the NBA choose to go. That's a crucial dynamic because it's not just what they walk into day one, it's what they can build the team and the partnership they have moving forward. So I do think it works for Embiid. For Philadelphia, I think it also potentially works. Look, Houston has a lot of young prospects that are talented. I think Alperen Şengün would definitely be in any deal because I can't see the Rockets investing in 2 centers to that extent. And Şengün's a very talented 21-year-old who has star potential. So if the Sixers are dealing Embiid, I don't think they want to deal him to a division rival like the Knicks, especially one that's less than 100 miles away. I think ideally they wouldn't have him in the Eastern Conference at all. Trading him to a Western Conference team that is flush with young players that could potentially have a lot of upside. And while the Rockets don't have a ton of future draft capital, they do have a lot of unprotected picks from Brooklyn the next 4 years in particular, or pick assets, I should say, that could potentially be high in the first round, depending on what happens with the Nets. There's a lot of uncertainty there. So I could see that checking the box for Philadelphia because I don't think this is a situation like when, say, the Nets traded James Harden to Philly actually in February of 2022, and they took Ben Simmons, who was viewed as slightly lesser star at that time, and then a few role players along with him because you could convince yourself that maybe that works since you already had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in place. No, this isn't like that. I don't see the Sixers looking to trade Joel Embiid for, say, Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. That just doesn't make sense for their situation. If you're trading Joel Embiid, literally the MVP of the league, a guy who averaged over 33 points and 10 rebounds per game on peak efficiency last year, along with presumably losing James Harden as well. At that point, if not going totally into a rebuild, you have to at least think upside. It's sort of like when the Rockets were losing in late 2020, both James Harden and Russell Westbrook, two former MVPs. And even if it wasn't an immediate rebuild, you had to think upside in terms of draft equity, young players with a ton of upside moving forward. And the Rockets did eventually, of course, pivot to a rebuild. But the key is upside. You need to give yourself that type of optionality. And the Rockets can make it work for Philadelphia. Now, they're not the only team from the West that can do that. Sure, you can point to Oklahoma City, Utah, teams like that also have comparable young players and perhaps even more draft equity. But then you get into the fact that, look, I'm not sure Embiid would be happy to play there. And I'm not sure if there's quite the same timeline fit there. In Houston, because of the Fred VanVleet factor and Ime Udoka, there is a bit more short-term emphasis as opposed to Oklahoma City and Utah, which seems to be more gradual of their build. So between Embiid not necessarily wanting to go there and not being super gung-ho on it, I have a really tough time seeing that being a fit. And so because of that, Houston could slide in as a guy, as the type of team that works for both Embiid individually and also for the Sixers in terms of giving them the types of assets that you need. So because of that, I think it's pretty realistic. Now, you can point out that from a timeline perspective, the Rockets can't do anything now. But here's the thing, I don't think anything is likely to happen in the very short term anyway, because even if Joel Embiid was to walk into Daryl Morey's office tomorrow and say, I want out, I really don't expect anything to happen this offseason for the same reason why the Rockets have a tough time putting a deal together. 30 to 40% of the NBA right now is untradeable because they signed contracts this offseason. And because of that, it is very difficult to match salaries on a player like Embiid that's going to be making nearly $50 million a year starting next year, the first year of a 4-year contract extension. The Rockets would have to send out about $40 million, give or take, at a minimum to take in Embiid. And that's very difficult, almost impossible right now. More realistically, it's something the Rockets can do around December 15th when the guys the Rockets signed this offseason, most notably Jock Landale and Jeff Green, guys that basically have human trade exception type deals, can be dealt. And of course, you can aggregate them with Kevin Porter Jr. and all of a sudden financially you're in the game. That wouldn't be the primary incentive for the trade, of course, but you would be sort of combining draft equity, perhaps from Brooklyn, 2 or 3 of your young core members, and then using those salaries to make the math work. Right now, the Rockets can't make the math work, but neither can most teams around the league. So from Philly's perspective, it would not make sense to do a deal now. I've heard some arguments that, look, maybe the Rockets should slow play it, see how these young players perform under Ime Udoka, who should be an upgrade over Steven Silas. Why would you rush into a deal like that? Well, you're not. If the Rockets can get in the game for Embiid, it's not something that's going to happen in the next few weeks. We're talking leading up to the 2024 deadline, or more realistically, the 2024 offseason. Because if we get close to the deadline, honestly, I could see Philadelphia sort of saying, look, if it's close at all, let's give it one more run in the playoffs. And if not, we'll revisit this next offseason. But even in the most aggressive posture possible, which is if Embiid knocks on Daryl's door or calls him tomorrow and says, I want out, absolute worst case for the Sixers. And Embiid has not asked out yet. Again, we're just sort of reading the tea leaves, and a lot of people around the league are expecting that it could happen sooner rather than later. Then worst case, I think it's like the Nets and Kevin Durant a year ago when it's the same contractual dynamic, year one of a 4-year deal. And the Nets said, look, we don't have to trade you. And right now, especially when it comes to matching salaries, there's just not enough options. So let's go into the season, give it a chance. And if it doesn't work out, we'll revisit this closer to the deadline when everyone around the league can trade 90+% of their roster. And that's what happened. Obviously, they gave it a try, but ultimately, Kevin wasn't moved, or he wasn't moved off his position, I mean, and then he was moved, traded to Phoenix leading up to this deadline. So because of that, look, even though the Rockets have a tough time making the math work now, I think they can make the math work at a cost that's really not prohibitive financially to Philadelphia, because all of these guys are basically on 1-year deals. We're talking about KPJ, Jock Landale, Jeff Green, and then you combine in the actual assets, which is members of your young core, Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, Amin Thompson, Cam Whitmore. At least a couple of those core 6 in terms of your prospects, I think, would have to go out. Şengün would almost certainly be in the deal for reasons I mentioned earlier. But look, because of that, it's not going to happen now, but in terms of the timeline, the Rockets could be a fit, because by the time I think the Sixers are willing to move, the Rockets can definitely make it work. In terms of assets and finances, it could be attractive to Philadelphia. And I think the Rockets could be led by Ime Udoka, attractive to Embiid as well. The question is whether it's worth it to the Rockets, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But the first angle I wanted to explore was just whether it makes sense for everyone else. And as I see it, Paolo, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems, while not imminent, you can definitely see a path that this can happen, right?
I mean, I've been talking about it not in the Rocket sphere of Twitter, but for a while now, because it's been pretty clear that whether it was because he was coming to the Rockets or because he was going not because he's going to demand to trade somewhere else, Harden didn't seem to be, you know, or, talking long term with the Sixers, right? And so I actually thought what I thought would happen earlier in the offseason was that this problem would solve itself, because I thought if this happened pre-draft, right? If James Harden signed with the Rockets at the beginning of free agency, before rookies have already signed their if they have already signed their rookie skill contracts, I actually expected him to get traded to the Trailblazers for, I don't know, Scoot Henderson, uh, the shooting guard they have, the Shaden Sharp,
Mm-hmm.
and a combination of picks, because the situation kind of fix each other, right? Because that would give the Sixers a really exciting young backcourt, and it would give the Blazers the solution to the Damian Lillard problem. Now, Damian Lillard still hasn't been traded, which means it's still not impossible for this to happen. It would just have to wait until Scoot is tradable again. But you see what I mean? It's not that surprising. The Sixers went all in when they traded for James Harden. There's no more picks, and the only movable asset that I would say is a positive asset right now that they have is Tyrese Maxey. And they're probably not going to get better than him in a trade if they trade him. So, especially considering that he is on his rookie contract, making a bargain for his production. So I'm not that surprised that this was going to happen. Um, it hasn't happened yet, but I think for sure it will. If not this year, next year for sure. Unless Daryl pulls a rabbit out of his hat, I'll say,
Yeah.
just to
And
be PR friendly.
we should point out, by the way, that some people will say he's under contract for 4 years. Why would you rush
That's never
into it?
stopped anyone.
Well, yes, but also conversely, because he's under contract for 4 years and because he's still on the right side of 30, that's also peak value. As opposed to if you hold on to a guy to where he has less contractual control and then he gets into his 30s and perhaps his production slips a little bit if he pouts or the situation around him is bad, then all of a sudden you have less leverage in terms of what you can get back in a trade. So while I don't think the Sixers, if he were to ask out tomorrow, would rush into it, if for no other reason, they'll stall until December 15th so that teams around the league, including the Rockets, can offer peak value, which they can't now with 30 to 40% of the league untradeable, having signed new deals this offseason. But in terms of trading him this season versus next, this season is really not that unfathomable because from Philly's perspective, if he has one foot out the door, there is some risk in waiting because his value is only going to get worse if you hold him into that contract.
Yeah, it becomes the interesting issue, because how does Daryl Morey play into this? Because if is the solution for Philly, like, what if Embiid just goes to the front office and he says, "Hey, I stand with James here. I think he was done wrong, and I don't feel comfortable playing here anymore if Daryl's still here." To me,
Mm.
that could be that, some head is going to roll in the next year. It could not be Embiid's. It could be that just how sometimes they just switch out the head coach. They've already done that, so, and the rumors are
Yeah.
still out there. The next step is you either trade the star player or you change the GM if he is involved in what the issues are right now, which it seems like he is, judging by what James Harden said this week. So it could also be that. It could also be both. They could, is Daryl Morey really wanting to be in Philly if they are going into a rebuild? Never struck me as that type of GM. When he left the Rockets right before they headed into a rebuild,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't exactly go to a rebuilding team afterwards. So I don't know how Daryl would feel about that, but I think all of those factors would play into how a deal for Joel Embiid would happen, because, well, we saw what Daryl Morey did with Ben Simmons. He took a while until he dealt him. And Embiid has a longer contract than Simmons had at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that plays into it as well. But just to get into if it makes sense or not for the Rockets, right? I've been very divided as far as what my take on this was. A couple of days ago, before the Kelly Eco quote came out, I was kind of just no. First, because I didn't put that much thought into it, right? Because it was, a far out possibility. But trading for a 29-year-old, which would probably be 30 by the time we trade for him, injury-prone superstar is usually a bad idea in a rebuild. That being said,
Although I will say, speaking of injury prone, he has played in 66 and 68 games the last couple of years. So while not perfect, it's not quite as bad as a lot of people think.
true. That being said, right, as you said, he's been fairly, not that injury prone the last couple of years. And I think it ultimately, it's kind of a cop-out answer, but ultimately it has to come down to the price. I think, as you said, Alperen Sengun has to be involved, because unless you're going to go through some crazy, stretch dynamics, he's not able to play with Embiid. Neither of them can play the four, so that's basically it there. And so, to me, ultimately, a deal would come down to how much do the Sixers value Sengun, or is anybody around the league in love enough with Sengun to give the Sixers something that they truly value in an Embiid trade? Because even if the Rockets don't value Sengun as much as some would like, they still value him, and they still know what he is, right? And if the Sixers value Sengun less than the Rockets, they're going to demand Sengun, probably one of Jabari or Jalen or Amen, and one of the other core six, I would expect, plus picks, plus salary filler. Like, this is an MVP candidate. No, not a candidate. He was the MVP.
He is the MVP.
He is the current MVP. He is also a guy that's going to fit into basically any system. I mean, he played pick and roll with James Harden. He can play as a post hub. He is a defensive player of the level player. He's an anchor, right? Any team can play with a defensive anchor at the five. This is not a. He is, as far as the big goes, a superstar big goes, as plug and play as you can get. I mean, if we think about star bigs in the league right now, there's three offensive ones. There's Karl Anthony Towns, there's Jokic, and there's Embiid. Jokic needs a system around him that takes probably years to develop and trade for the right players. Karl Anthony Towns is flawed and hasn't been able to have postseason success basically ever since Jimmy Butler, if we can even call that success. I mean, just make it to the postseason. So, and Embiid is not like either one of those guys. He is, he's versatile enough to be able to play multiple roles, and so it's not that hard to build a team around him. So that's a bonus towards trading for him. The other angle that I can see is kind of what the Celtics did with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, in the sense that very early on they were a very good team, and those players were kind of grew as NBA players and got to superstardom. I mean, Tatum to superstardom, Brown to just stardom in a winning environment. And we saw that once, Kyrie left or Kemba Walker left, they were ready to take the reins. I would probably guess quicker than they would have if they had not been there. So depending on who stays, it might also be beneficial to trade for Embiid, and you're going all in, right? You're going to try to win in the next 4 years. But it's not we're going all in the next 4 years and then we've got to rebuild again, because you might still have a couple of guys that are core pieces, because the Rockets have so many of them. They have 6 that stick around and are able to continue, just like the Celtics did with Kyrie Irving. Although, to be fair, I think they got Kyrie for Isaiah Thomas, which is not really that big of a price, right? But yeah, basically, it makes sense from that perspective. At the same time, as I said, it comes down to the price. If they don't value Sengun, and the package has to be either around other players or around Sengun and he is rerouted to a third team, that kind of changes the calculus a bit. Because if you're bringing in Embiid and you don't have Jalen anymore, and you don't have Amen Thompson anymore, and you don't have Alperen Sengun anymore, yes, you still have Tari, Cam, and Jabari. But those guys ceiling wise are not to the level of Sengun, Amen, and Jalen, just because they're not engines, right? And I'm sure they'll be great players, and Jabari has some upside to be an offensive option down the line. But you're basically reducing your ceiling a lot, and you've been rebuilding for 3 years, and that's not what you're aiming for. And at that point, I would rather just keep going with the young players and see where that takes us. To the point about the asking price. And this is something that I'm in multiple NBA circles, whether Twitter, whether Discord, whether it is Reddit. A lot of people have not shifted their mindset when it comes to superstar trades, because yes, in theory, Joel Embiid is worth, I don't know, like the best players on the Rockets plus picks. But ultimately, it's not about what Joel Embiid is worth, and you can very easily make the parallel between him at 30 next year and James Harden being an MVP level player at 31 when he was with the Rockets. Ultimately, the star player kind of sets his own market, and so it's not really about paying the value Embiid is worth in a trade. It's about paying more than the other teams that Joel is willing to go to.
Yes.
And right now, we only know of the Rockets and the Knicks. And if we're talking about the Knicks, their best young piece is RJ Barrett, which I'm not a fan of. And I'm sure if the front office in Philly is analytics driven at all, they won't like RJ Barrett, the guy that has topped out in 4 or 5 seasons in the NBA, he has topped out at 52% true shooting, if I'm not mistaken. He shot 40% from three, and he was still terrible efficiency wise. It works for Thibs because he is a versatile defender and he doesn't really care about efficiency. It's more a brute force type offense, but it's not going to work as a centerpiece for a trade for a guy like Joel Embiid. He's also already on his second contract, which is a pretty massive one. Their centerpiece is not that great, and so most of the value is going to come from picks. And the other young players they have, Quentin Grimes is a nice young player. He's not a guy you're going to build around.
Right.
Emmanuel Quickly, the same thing. He's a nice young player. He's not someone they're going to build around. I would probably say that Alperen Şengün, from the perspective of a team that's about to bottom out, is a much better player than anybody, or much more much more valuable player than anybody that New York has that would be in the trade for Embiid, because Jalen Brunson is a great player. Philly's not going to be interested in Jalen Brunson with Maxey there, and in no chance of making a postseason run or being a contender at all. Nobody aims for mediocrity. We know about this, unless you're Daryl Morey back when Les Alexander was the owner of the Rockets. So because of that, if Embiid makes the market so short that it's only Houston and New York, you only have to beat the Knicks. And if you only have to beat the Knicks and you're willing to play the long game, you might not need to even give up Şengün plus one of Amen or Amen or Jalen Green. You might be able to pull it off for Şengün, I don't know, Cam Whitmore or Tari Eason. I'll probably say that the
There was a report, by the way, that Daryl Morey really liked Cam Whitmore, so keep that in the back of your mind.
And so I would guess that a team rebuilding would likely like Cam Whitmore more than Tari Eason, just because Tari is 21 going to 22. He's not really an upside pick. I mean, he has upside, but he's not tantalizing upside. Build around him, type of guy. Even though I love Tari. So you could probably get a deal if the only team you've got to beat is the Knicks. If you can probably get a deal done for Şengün, I don't know what, Şengün, KPJ, Cam Whitmore, and a bunch of picks. Could probably get that done. Philly would run a young lineup of Maxey at the point guard, KPJ at the shooting guard, which is his true position. He'd look a lot better at it. Cam Whitmore at the 3, Alperen Şengün at the 5, running dribble handoffs with Tyrese Maxey. I mean, that's a fun young team, right? And they get to replenish a lot of the picks that they gave up on the James Harden trade, dumping Al Horford, all of these trades that they've done over the years that have left them basically without picks. I think that would be enough to beat an offer of, even if it is RJ Barrett. I mean, even if it is RJ Barrett, if it's RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly and 4 swaps or 4 first and 3 swaps, I think the Rockets probably have that beat, because as we know, it's much better to have consolidated value in an asset like Şengün than a bunch of question marks like it would be with Knicks or strong picks. Because let's be honest, the Rockets also have something that New York doesn't have: the ability to give Philly picks that are not their own, which won't be lessened in value because Embiid's there. If Embiid goes to New York, the next 4 years of picks for New York are basically worthless because Embiid's going to be there, right? He's going to be good. Rockets can offer Brooklyn picks or picks that have swaps with Brooklyn, so you're trading Embiid to the Rockets, but you're getting someone else's future. And so because of that, that's another thing that Rockets can offer that the Knicks can't. So ultimately, to me, I'm in most scenarios, right? if Embiid says he's okay going to the Thunder, for example, I'm probably out because it's going to take a lot to outbid them. And the Thunder do have SGA, even though they're not exactly ready to win right now. SGA is a superstar right now, in my opinion, so they can try to build around that. But if Embiid names New York and Houston or some other team that doesn't really have that many assets, then I think there are worlds where it does make sense because
Yeah.
you get to kind of you get to to have your cake and eat it too, in a sense. If you can get a trade done without giving up Jalen or Aman Thompson, even if you have to give up a bunch of picks and Şengün and Cam Whitmore and maybe there are reasons in there, hopefully not, but now you have Fred VanVleet, Aman Thompson, Jalen Green, probably still Dylan Brooks because why would Philly want him?
Hmm.
That's basically a guaranteed playoff team. Joel Embiid is an MVP. He is the MVP right now, and it would be invaluable experience for these young guys to, for the next guaranteed 3 to 4 seasons, be playing contender level basketball. Um, I'm just saying that it's a valid option. I'm not saying I back it to
Hmm.
100%. I'm saying it's a valid option, just as valid as it is to wait and see what these guys turn out to be. Because right now we're really positive about how the season's going to go because it's the off season. We made a bunch of moves. That's what's expected. But there are plenty of worlds out there where this season isn't a play-in type season, and it takes a while. And there's multiple examples of rebuilding teams out there that never right the ship, and for defensive culture or whatever it is, never become good enough by the time they have to pay extensions, and then end up having to make tough decisions and potentially pay the wrong guys. There's a lot that can go wrong with our rebuild still, even though it looks good right now, and you can never completely discount what a sure thing like Joel Embiid is, as long as you're able to get him and retain a lot of your upside. Because if Joel Embiid wasn't able to win with James Harden, he likely won't be able to win year one with
Hmm.
Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet. But in 2 years with Amen Thompson, who knows? In 2 years with Jalen Green looking like an even better player, who knows? Uh, but not only will it be good for the now, I think it will also be good for the future as it will give these guys experience that's basically invaluable, which is basically the argument we made for bringing in James Harden, 6 months ago, just scaled up tenfold because Joel
Right.
Embiid is literally the MVP. He is
Right.
literally a defensive player of the year guy. He is literally a complete transformation of your team by himself. Joel Embiid by himself, if you plug Joel Embiid into the Brooklyn Nets right now, they're easily a contender. That's how good he is.
Yeah.
Right. So that's basically what I'm at. I'm sitting somewhere in the middle. There are scenarios where I can see it happening. There are scenarios where I don't really support it. But we trusted the Rockets to make the right decision when it comes to James Harden, which was a really nuanced one where it could easily swing really positively or really negatively based on the length of the contract. And I think they ended up making the correct decision. So I trust that they would, weigh the
Hmm.
pros and cons and be nuanced in this decision as well, and not just go all in one way or the other.
Yeah. To your point on trade filler, because I think any package would start with the human trade exceptions of Jock Landale and Jeff Green, and you're at $20 million right there. You need one more. I'm in full agreement. It's unlikely to be Dylan Brooks. I think for a team like Philadelphia selling off the MVP of the league, and if not going directly into a rebuild, at least thinking upside with whatever they do, not wanting the Pascal Siakam type packages, or when, for example, the Nets, as I referenced earlier, got Ben Simmons plus role players for James Harden in early 2022. No, they're going to be thinking a lot more prospect oriented, even if it's not all draft capital. And so I think Kevin Porter Jr., with both year to year optionality on his contract and still being only 22, 23 years old, is going to have a lot more appeal to a team like Philadelphia as the piece to get the salaries close after the two human trade exceptions than Dylan Brooks, who at 27, he is what he is. And while that could be a good role player for a contender like a team acquiring Joel Embiid would potentially be, I don't think he makes a lot of sense for Philadelphia. So I agree. In this construct, it's much more likely to be KPJ than Dylan Brooks. Look, what I'll say about it, I'm not 100% on board, but I think you at least have to explore. Ultimately, just as you said, it comes down to the value. There's some scenarios where it makes sense. There's some scenarios where it doesn't. But I find myself this week much more annoyed by the anti-Embiid faction than I am by the pro Embiid crowd, because I think some of the arguments are just detached from reality, quite frankly. When I posted the story on Rockets Wire, I would say it felt like 75-25. About 3/4 of the reaction was against going after Joel Embiid. But most of the arguments just did not make sense. And I'm not going to say that people are dumb. I think some of it is no one really thought that this was possible, and we're so preconditioned the last few years saying it's way too soon to make a move like that a lot of Rockets fans just haven't adjusted to the new reality. But when you look deeper, a lot of the anti-Embiid arguments are just really flawed. For starters, I'll try and go through them quick. The timeline argument, which is it goes back to, why don't you give the young guys a chance with Ime Udoka and see if Ime can do something with these guys and bring out more of them than what Steven Silas was able to do? That's a fair argument. But again, we're not talking about doing the deal this offseason. We're talking about most reasonably February 2024 or June 2024. So you're going to be able to get at least half a season's worth of data, if not a full season, before you really make this decision. So yeah, I agree. I would like to see some of these young guys with Ime and learn more about them before you trade a ton of young prospect capital and or future draft picks for a guy like Joel Embiid, who's 29 years old. Again, though, understand the timeline. We're not talking about now. We're talking about months or even a year from now by the time this actually happens. So that argument, give the young guys a chance with Ime, that falls apart to me. Another thing I've seen, there's at least a faction of folks that are out on Joel Embiid because of the Sixers underachieving in the playoffs. And I've seen people picking apart this whole idea of, is he a playoff performer? Is he mentally weak? And so on and so forth. Look, he's the reigning MVP. He is clearly a top 5 player, maybe top 3 on the entire planet. The impact stats show it without a doubt. We're talking about 33 and 10 on elite efficiency for a big man who, with a fairly power-oriented game, I would think he ages fairly gracefully, especially if you have other guys that can help carry the load into his 30s. You would be lucky if any of the core 6 that the Rockets have in terms of their prospects, Jalen and Şengün, Jabari and Tari, Amin and Cam, you'd be lucky if any of the core 6 ever have a season as good as the one that Joel Embiid just completed when he won MVP. I'm not trying to be a hater. That's the reality. There's this vicious cycle where once a player gets to all-star range, to the point where we can look at them and say, okay, in the NBA, a sport where one player can mean so much, we expect to carry his team into contention. And then if they don't win a title, then we nitpick. We saw this with James Harden over his years in Houston, and we look at every flaw and say something must be wrong with that guy. And so it's a vicious cycle, because when they're younger, somehow every prospect gets a halo put around them. Every shortcoming gets brushed aside through some combination of excuses.
Except for Jalen Green.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, even in Houston, like Jalen's shortcomings, we dismiss them. And I understand he's young, but we say, look, he's only 19, he's only 20, he's going to grow out of this stuff. The coaching isn't great. The surrounding infrastructure isn't there with regards to his teammates. All that stuff is fair. But then from a fan perspective, especially fans of rebuilding teams, people only focus on the top 1%, or sometimes even like the top 0.1% of outcomes. Like, fans talk about Şengün as a mini Jokic, and I've seen people compare Jalen Green to Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. Of course, we can dream about that, but that is extraordinarily unlikely. And what's unfortunate is that it leads to an NBA where you can have a guy who's wildly successful. You can have like a top 1 or top 2% outcome, which would definitely be the case in terms of Joel Embiid's career relative to his draft slot in, I believe it was 2014, because he sat out 2 seasons with the foot injury before he got going during the process Sixers years. We've somehow gotten to a point in NBA discourse. There's a vicious cycle where we build these guys up to where all these young guys, we say they're going to be the next MJ, the next Kobe, the next Jokic, the next LeBron. And then when they get to really good outcomes, in the case of Embiid, I'd say like top 2% outcome at the worst, somehow it feels underwhelming, because we build up in our heads early in their careers, are they going to be transcendent? And even though Embiid has some flaws with regards to just how impactful is he defensively when the other team is truly going 5 out, we've seen that become a theme in some of the Boston matchups over the years in terms of just how dominant he is in the playoffs. Does he have that extra gear? Those things are valid questions, but at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie. He is a top 5 player. So again, the people nitpicking over playoff stuff, it's sort of like, we just got through with the James Harden experience from 2012 through 2020. Look, everybody nitpicked the hell out of James, and yet I don't think Rockets fans regret the October 2012 move to get him at all. It was worthwhile. It was one of the best deals in franchise history. And even with all the playoff inconsistencies, and some people will call it choking, that people ascribe to James, look, in 2018, he was the MVP of the league, and the Rockets should have won the title against probably the most talented opponent in NBA history, if not for just a perfect storm of bad luck in that game 7 against the Warriors. So even James, with his issues that got nitpicked to death from really about 2017 onward, still was on the verge of a title because he is that good. So there's a lot of people that early in the careers of top prospects give way too much of a halo. And then by the time they get to 29 or 30, they're way too critical. It's a vicious cycle because they get built up so much and then they compensate wondering, well, why didn't the guy get to this outcome? When in reality, the outcome, at least the Jokic, MJ, LeBron, Kobe type thing, is just so unlikely that it just wasn't reasonable to expect. And of course, as I've said many times before, people underestimate just how hard it is to be the last team standing out of 30. If a guy isn't leading his team consistently to wins and into contention, then yeah, it's fair to wonder, are some of the stats, are some of the numbers empty calories? But in the case of a guy like Embiid, whose team is consistently winning 50, 55 games a year and winning playoff series and only losing against really good teams like the Celtics, look, it's not like it's not translating. It's just very difficult to be the last team standing out of 30. And so people sometimes look at these stars as if there must be something fundamentally wrong, when in reality is they're still really, really good. And the idea that one of your prospects is somehow not just going to be a top 2% guy, but like a top 1% or top 0.1%, again, you're just sort of moving the goalpost. And so I think we're just in this vicious cycle, and it leads to top 5 guys like James Harden over his years in Houston, and now Joel Embiid with the Sixers being nitpicked to death. Not saying that there's no valid criticisms, but at the same time, you do have to take a step back and say, look, this guy is still really, really good, and he's only 29. So while, again, not saying you have to blanket endorse him, not saying that he's really the MVP, we know Jokic is the more impactful player, he's still really, really good. And I think that's somehow gotten lost in this first take world where whenever a contender falls short, people just nitpick the hell out of the stars on that team, and all of a sudden it just makes the perceptions a lot worse than they actually should be. The other arguments I want to go through. So I mentioned timeline earlier in the context of when the Rockets would execute the deal. I also want to talk about timeline from the perspective of the Rockets' contention window, because I think the last couple of years, whenever there's an all-star type player on the market, for example, in 2022, some people brought up, should the Rockets consider dealing for Donovan Mitchell? And generally the answer is no, for a couple of reasons. Because A, while an all-star, it's like a top 15 to 20 player. It's not a true top 5 guy, which Embiid is. So because of that, it's not as if the guy would lift you that much immediately. And also the Rockets at that time were just so far away in terms of the supporting infrastructure, the coaching staff, other veterans. It was basically just a bunch of kiddies. And so between the guy not being as good as Embiid and there not being any, supporting infrastructure, generally people say, look, it's not worth trading, because by the time the Rockets actually do build up that infrastructure around the player, the guy is either going to be close to free agency, or maybe he's on the downhill side of his career at that point. You're just so far away that it's not worth cashing in a lot of your assets. This is different on a number of levels. For starters, Embiid is way better than a Donovan Mitchell type. We're talking an actual top 5, maybe top 3 type player. I would also point out, and this is where I don't think a lot of Rockets fans have adjusted their expectations. They haven't recalibrated because they haven't seen it on the floor yet. The surrounding infrastructure is different, most notably because of Fred VanVleet, who, as I mentioned earlier, is in perfect age and contractual alignment with Joel Embiid. Both are 29 years old. They turn 30, I think, Fred next February, Embiid next March. So basically perfect age alignment. Embiid signed for 4 years, Fred for as much as 3. That's where the team option could come in handy, as we've talked about in the past. So they're in perfect age and contractual alignment. And then in terms of their impact, look, I know Fred isn't a star, but when you look at the impact stats, assuming he fits as the Rockets think, he's been when healthy, a top 30 to top 40 player in the NBA. So if you're talking about having a top 5 player in Embiid, and maybe better than that, the reigning MVP, a top 40 player in Fred VanVleet, who are in perfect age and contractual alignment, at least some capable role players, guys like Dylan Brooks, Tari Eason, that are ready to help you contribute to winning now. It does not take a ton more to get to contention. Now, you're not there just between, I'm not saying Joel, Fred, and role players is a contender. No, I'm not saying that. But you're not that far. You're at a point where if even one or two of the young core guys you're able to keep, like Paolo, you were saying, if you could keep both Jalen Green and Amin Thompson, what if you're able to keep Jalen Green and he takes a leap forward this season? All of a sudden the calculus is different. Maybe Jalen Green is a souped up Tyrese Maxey, and you're looking at, Joel, Jalen Green, and Fred VanVleet in something of a similar model to Joel, Tyrese Maxey, and James Harden. Not that Fred is Harden in terms of his playmaking or how dynamic he is, but he's also a way better defender. He's way better off the ball. There's way better utility, and perhaps James can be an even better version of Tyrese. I'm not saying that that's for sure going to happen, but what if Jalen has that type of leap? And, if he does, then you go into, well, if Jalen takes that type of leap, could you get the deal done without having to give him to Philly? Well, that's where it goes back into what you were saying earlier, Paolo. You don't say, I'm going to do the deal no matter what. You negotiate. But at least you should be open because, and I know you want to chime in on this too, but if you have Embiid and Fred under contract for a number of years, not like they're going to be able to leave anytime soon, and they're in age of contractual alignment, you've got role players to contribute to winning, at least a couple of them in Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason. We know they're ready now. And then one or two of your young guys take the leap. You're really not that far away, right?
Yeah, and not only that, the Rockets are not at the lottery tax fund. They're like, what, 20, 30 million
Right.
short? Like, you still have plenty of margin to upgrade the team. You're still going to be relying on guys on their rookie contracts for the next 2 years to provide a lot of production, which value-wise, it's kind of like what the Sixers have with Tyrese Maxey. He's worth way more than the 2 or 3 million he's getting paid because he's on a rookie contract, which gives you a lot of margin to invest into other positions, which makes it so Fred VanVleet being overpaid for 3 years or 2 years plus one not hurt as much. Same with Dylan Brooks, and it makes it so you still have a lot of margin to get up there. I mean, we still don't know if still one would pay the tax, but up until the tax threshold, there's
Right.
still a lot the Rockets have to work with. Other thing that I could mention very easily, well, Joel Embiid has only been coached by two coaches in his career. Doc Rivers was known for choking in the playoffs. I mean, I don't really need to make that point. Just go look at his teams, and he's been really impressive in the ways he finds to lose playoff series. And before that, it was Brett Brown, who currently doesn't coach in the league anymore.
Yeah.
So there is an argument to be made that Ime Udoka, a guy that took a team to the finals his first year, a team that since then or the year after wasn't able to make it to the finals, and for the most part kind of rolled over and died or was about to roll over and die in the series with Philly before picking it back up. And with the Heat as well, they were dead to rights. They managed to bring it back, but the Heat are not exactly an extremely talented team. The Celtics should have them beat basically at every position, because I would consider Tatum to be a better player than Jimmy Butler. They should have them beat basically at every position except for center, where Robert Williams is no slouch and he plays a similar role to what Bam can do defensively. Regardless, it's a different situation, and who knows? We have only seen Joel Embiid under two coaches. Who knows what is left to unlock for him? And he's already an extraordinary player, right? So I just wanted to mention that the argument that he's fallen short in the playoffs was all you can do in the NBA, unless you can build a super team with 3 superstars, which is really rare, is put yourself in the upper tier of contenders.
Right.
And then you have to hope that luck falls your way, injuries fall your way, shots, just happen to go in. I mean, just imagine how different James Harden's legacy would be if if he won with the Thunder when he was on his rookie deal, when he made it to the finals. It'd be
Yeah.
completely different. He wouldn't have that dark cloud over
That
his
stigma.
career the entire time. The pressure's probably much lower. What happens if Chris Paul doesn't get hurt? As much as he did choke sometimes, there's plenty of what ifs that have nothing to do with him that pretty easily make it so he wins a championship in his prime. With Joel Embiid, he spent a lot of his career with a guy that's an awful fit in Ben Simmons, and then he got 1 year with 1.5 years with James Harden,
Mm-hmm.
who is well past his prime. He's still a good player, but well past his prime. And all you can do is get yourself in the conversation. And Joel Embiid is one of the few players in the NBA right now that by himself gets you in the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. There's guys that you could argue are better playoff performers. Jimmy Butler is an example of this. Even Jason Tatum is probably an example of this. I don't think either Jimmy Butler or Jason Tatum get you instantly by themselves in the conversation as a contender if you just plug and play them into a team. Because Embiid provides massive value because of the position he plays, because he gets to be the anchor and provide immense value defensively. He can be both on and off the ball offensively. He can provide value in basically every possession in the game, which is something that you can't really say about, which is why two-way centers are so damn valuable. You can't say this about Jason Tatum because even though he is a good defender, in the perimeter you can get you can attack from a different side. You can screen a defender away. You are not involved in every possession. Joel Embiid is involved in literally every single possession. Or well, I mean, you can space the floor, you can play 5 out, but for the most part, in every single possession, it's. I don't think people really give credit to how much better the Sixers were than what they were supposed to be. I mean, James Harden defensively, he was never good.
He's a mess.
But right now, he's nothing.
Yeah, he's terrible.
Tobias Harris is an okay defender. He's not that impressive. Tyrese Maxey is not a good defender. Besides Joel Embiid, there's PJ Tucker, who's a good defender on the Sixers.
There's not much.
They played Georges Niang a significant amount of minutes. Perkin Korkmaz probably didn't play in the playoffs, but he played throughout the season. I mean, that team is not supposed to be competitive defensively. It was only competitive defensively because Joel Embiid is there. Imagine how good a team can be defensively if Joel Embiid is there, and the other players are also somewhat competent defensively. I think because of his situation, we somewhat undervalue how much of an impact that specific type of player at that specific position can have just on the game overall. Because we often see, even when we pair up superstars, usually they don't fit perfectly with each other because, well, only one of them can have the ball at a time, right? Or one of them is more of a defensive guy, and while he can be the primary on-ball defender, he can get screened away, and you lose all that value instantly, or not all of it, but part of it instantly. James Harden and Chris Paul were a good combination, but they weren't a perfect fit. KD, James Harden, and Kyrie were an awesome combination, insane offensive firepower. They weren't a perfect fit. It's very hard to get a perfect fit. The thing with Joel Embiid is he's basically two superstars in one. He is the same thing as if you got an elite defensive center and an elite offensive center.
Yep.
But it's just one player.
Yeah, again.
And so it's, he's incredibly, just to get it over with, he's incredibly impressing as a player, which is why he's one of the few superstars at 20 or 30 years old. I'll call it 30 because it wouldn't be this year. That would actually be okay trading for. If you made this point about Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Jimmy Butler, Jokic is too young, so that doesn't count. But if you made that point about, I mean, LeBron is obviously not, someone I would trade for because of the cost and his age. But if you list off, Damian Lillard is another one of them. Donovan Mitchell, I wouldn't trade for. Just trying to think but just as off the top of my head, I wouldn't, because they wouldn't be as transformational as quick, and so you'd get diminishing returns from the adaptation period. Joel Embiid requires no adaptation. He's plug and play. He's insanely good, and he'll fit with whatever team it is. So yeah, while I'm
Yeah.
not saying do it under like be in the race under any circumstances, I mean, just don't outright don't
Yeah.
outright refuse to do it either.
Absolutely not. Again, I think a lot of Rockets fans are just preconditioned and not taking into account just how unique this circumstance potentially is. Players of Embiid's impact just do not typically become available. And for them to come available and have interest in you is even more rare. And I think, again, people are sort of used to the last couple of years. We've gone through these hypotheticals with, Donovan Mitchell in 2022, Ben Simmons in 2021, back when people were still hopeful he could be a quasi-star and the Rockets were debating the original Harden trade. Then even to an extent, when we're talking about bringing Harden back in 2023, it's always been how much is it really worth it? Because this guy, how much does it really get you closer to contention? And by the time you're ready, is that player still going to be in his prime? Is he going to be a free agent? Is he going to want to stay? How does the puzzle fit together? And a lot of it comes back to the fact that those guys, while good, we're talking, best case top 15, top 20, top 25. This is way more than that. This is because of his two-way impact on both ends. You're looking top 5, maybe top 3. This is different. The magnitude of it is different, and the Rockets are at a slightly different place organizationally, most notably with Fred VanVleet and Ime Udoka. The last 2 points I want to try and deconstruct, or last 2 arguments I want to deconstruct before we turn our attention to the schedule as we wind down the podcast. Another argument I've seen against it is that you have potentially this very long window now with the young core. And as you mentioned, Paolo, and you're right, there's no guarantees. Even though there's optimism now after a good offseason, again, things are about to get real in a hurry. If the Rockets get off to a 1-9, 2-8 start, even with an easy schedule, again, more on that momentarily, all of a sudden, we're going to be changing our tune very quickly. There are no guarantees that this rebuild works, even if you accumulate a lot of young talent the way the Rockets have. But I have seen the argument that, look, if you then give so much money to guys like Embiid and Fred, who are 29, they're going to be 30 next year, then what does it do for your timeline? How much longer is your window open? And again, it comes back to the same question: who is left amongst your young core after you do this deal? If you have enough, there is a world where it makes sense, because even if Embiid and Fred, let's say the next 3 years are the remainder of their true prime. Okay, well, if by 33 they're starting to show little signs of aging, it's okay if you have guys like Jalen Green and Amin Thompson who are becoming superstars in their own right and able to carry the load. In many ways, it's similar to how we've seen Devin Booker allow Chris Paul and now Kevin Durant to age gracefully, because Devin can take the heavy load over 82 and let guys like CP and KD pick their spots and conserve for the playoffs. To an extent, it's what we've seen with the Lakers with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. At least that was the thought, although Anthony's had a tough time staying healthy for long enough for that to work as well as envisioned. But the point is, there are examples of this. You can get, especially if we're talking true superstars, which Joel is, with modern medicine and technology, you can get these guys still playing at a high level into their mid to late 30s. It's about how you load manage them. And if you have the right sporting pieces, and guys like Jalen and Amin, if they stick around, are able to step into bigger roles, you can make that work. And so again, I want to underscore, not saying you do it under all circumstances. There absolutely is a point where you look at your roster after a hypothetical deal for Embiid and you say, look, this just isn't close enough to a championship. I don't feel good enough. And the results of the season are going to play into it as well. Do any of these guys show signs of stardom? And if so, are you able to keep them in the negotiations? Again, there's more data points to be gained, but there is a world where if you feel good about, 1 or 2 young guys are able to keep them, then just as Fred and Joel might be starting to decline a little bit, then those guys being on the upswing, they can take on a greater role as you get to the late 2020s and then let your other guys load manage. Not saying that that's the ideal. I'm just saying it is an option. And so just because they're in their 30s doesn't necessarily mean your window is all that different relative to what it appears to be now. And even if it appears to be a long time now because of the ages, again, there's no guarantees anyway, because of, we know how NBA contracts work. And even if these guys do pan out at an all-star or above level, then the new CBA in the NBA is going to make it very difficult to keep that team together over the long haul anyway. So I really don't think it necessarily impacts, your window that much, at least in this scenario where you can get Embiid at a fairly reasonable cost without having to truly give up the farm. Last point I want to get to, and this is just a very simple one. We've heard a lot of talk the last few months about Ime Udoka being the savior because he steered the Rockets away from James Harden, who a lot of the fan base didn't want. And now that Harden's starting all this drama with Daryl Morey and the Sixers, people feel even more emboldened that their original instinct not to trust Harden was correct and that the Rockets went the right direction. Time will tell. But what I will say is that if you trust Ime on that, why wouldn't you trust him on this? And it's pretty clear for Joel Embiid to potentially consider Houston, which has been a laughingstock the last 3 years. That shows you the power of the relationship between Joel and Ime, who again was an assistant with the Sixers. So if this were to happen, Ime would be an enormous part of it. So if you're going to say trust in Ime Udoka, and it's, I do think Ime steered them away from Harden, but I don't think it's all that. I don't think that the Rockets were 100% in for Harden before. As I understand it, it was a lot more, yeah, we'll potentially explore this. You'd be silly to turn it down, but we first got to see who our coach is going to be, decide how we're going to play, and then make that decision. Because ultimately, if the Rockets had decided even prior to the coaching search that for sure they're going to bring in James Harden, then that makes them less attractive to guys like Ime Udoka because all of a sudden they don't have flexibility. They can't remake the roster the way they want to play their style. You're telling them, yeah, there's all this flexibility, which we talked about being attractive, making the Rockets a destination in the coaching search. But then if we're saying that the new coach can have no input on what the Rockets do with it, then that takes away the appeal. So I think in terms of how we got here, yes, Ime, I think, had a role in the Rockets going a different direction than Harden, but I don't think necessarily they were going for Harden before. It was always more, yeah, we want to keep the door open, but then we're going to let the coach have input. And ultimately, this was the input that Ime wanted to have. And
I think
so,
it's on the James
go ahead.
Harden thing, just really quick. I think it's pretty obvious that the Rockets were never all in on it, because if they were, that would mean that tampering had occurred, which I'm sure it did, but that would mean that the Rockets made them if the Rockets were as all in as people make it out to be, and Ime Udoka saved them, James Harden would not only be calling Daryl Morey a liar, he'd be calling the Rockets liars as well because they made him a promise
Yeah.
that they'd sign him and then they didn't. So just put it out there.
Yeah,
If the Rockets were locked
the
into
all
James
in was
Harden,
James Harden on Houston, not Houston on James Harden.
yeah, so just to put it out there, if Rockets were as all in as most people say they were, James Harden would not be just firing shots at Daryl Morey, because it wouldn't be just Daryl Morey that didn't give him the money that he expected. It was also the Rockets that didn't give him the money that he expected and backed out of some preconceived, deal. So yeah, just want to point it out.
Anyway, to close the book on the whole Joel Embiid hypothetical, which again is probably months away, even if he asks out by the end of the offseason for a number of reasons, as outlined earlier, I don't think anything's going to happen in terms of an actual trade for Embiid until December 15th at the absolute earliest, more realistically, February or June of next year, depending on how things go for the Sixers in other areas between now and then. It's more just to stay tuned, keep it in mind as an option if you're a team like the Rockets that's potentially on his list. But yeah, even if some of the narrative is slightly overcooked with regards to Ime saving the Rockets from James Harden, look, the bottom line is for weeks, people have been talking a big game about how smart Ime is and how much they trust him and how thankful they are to have him here. Okay, if you feel that way, and that's perfectly fine. I agree. I'm on board with him. I think he was a great hire. I think he's somebody great for the future. But if you trust him on that, I don't know how you turn around and say this is a terrible idea when clearly Ime is one of, if well, not one of, he's the biggest reason why it would potentially happen. So just at a very superficial level, if you're going to trust Ime Udoka on this Harden decision, I think you've got to trust him on this as well and keep an open mind. And ultimately, that's how I'll wrap up, and we'll close with a little bit of schedule talk. Not saying you should for sure do it. Again, there is a point in which the asking price is so much that it just doesn't make sense because the team you're left with after trading for Embiid and pairing him with Fred VanVleet just doesn't have the upside to win a championship. And if that's the case, then yeah, you should walk away. And it could also be that if this season goes a lot worse than you think, then maybe none of these guys are that close that you feel that good about taking the type of leap that you need. And maybe in that scenario, maybe they become less attractive as assets to Philadelphia as well. And so the calculus shifts there. But regardless, at least keep an open mind to the idea. I don't see a reason why you would foreclose the possibility, especially when you consider we're talking about months from now when you're going to get more data. Now, as far as the schedule, look, I'll lead into this discussion just by saying it helps that the Rockets have a very soft open because in a year that's going to be pivotal on a number of fronts, can they make a leap forward? It'd be great for business if they did. I know they want to sell more tickets. They want to build buzz. They want fans to get back on board. And if you want these guys, we talk about all the, the rot of losing the last couple of years. If you want to change that, get them in a more competitive environment, getting them believing in all those benefits, then for so many reasons, it would be great to get off to a fast start, get the guys believing, get the fans believing. And so as opposed to last year when 13 the first 16 were on the road and felt like the season was over even before it started, this year 7 the first 9 at home. The 2 road games are the Magic and Spurs. So you have a chance to get off to a good start. And if you get off to a good start, who knows? Maybe that makes you more likely to trade at the deadline for big names, including potentially Joel Embiid, because you are a bit closer than you think right now. This season is about getting data. And if you want good data, a good start can help on a number of fronts. So to me, that's the biggest takeaway. We sort of knew, well, not sort of, we did know who they were going to play, with the lone exception of a few Western Conference teams. You'll play 3 times instead of 4. For the most part, you know the opponents. It's just the ordering. And as far as I see it, soft start is what the Rockets potentially could benefit a ton from as we set the narrative, not just for this season, but the future of this franchise.
Yeah, I'm with you. The biggest thing to look forward to is the fact that they start with Orlando and San Antonio, which, I mean, we gotta take it all with a grain of salt because we don't know how good these teams will be this year, right? Who knew the Sacramento Kings were going to be as good as they were last season? We know the West is a bloodbath and that there's basically no bad teams besides the Spurs, possibly the Blazers. But it's good to start off with 2 teams that should be beatable. And if the Rockets want to be in the play-in playoff contention, they have to be able to beat these teams. And just going back throughout the years that I've watched the NBA, when teams are trying to make the jump, the start of the season is really important. Sometimes it falls apart, like with the Pelicans last season. The Suns had, a scare before they traded for Chris Paul, I think, where they had a season that started off well, but then it completely fell apart. But these are young players. They need to have the confidence. We know how different Jalen Green looks when he's confident versus when he's not. And just buying into the system is a lot easier when you start off winning and when you establish that it is possible in the beginning and you don't have to convince yourself that it is throughout the road, right? So even if you start well and then it falls apart at some point, you can always look back to that start and see this is how it looks when it's going well. And it's possible, and we can do it. We have done it. We can get back to it. It's just a lot easier to motivate based off of that. Besides the obvious start, what I'm looking for is the last 4 weeks of the schedule, right? Looking at the last 4 weeks, we're looking at what? We're looking at Portland, who's likely going to be tanking, Utah, who's likely going to be tanking, Orlando, who has a possibility of tanking. Miami's not going to be tanking. Golden State probably isn't going to be tanking. By that time, the Timberwolves could be tanking. We play Utah 3 times in the last 4 weeks of the season, which is when teams start to make those decisions. We play Portland twice, and then we also play Washington, who's probably going to be tanking by that time, and we play the Bulls, who I would not be surprised if they were tanking as well, because they finally have their picks again after owing them to the Thunder because of the Vucevic trade for a while. So they could be tanking at that point as well. So it's good that the Rockets have no incentive to losing, right? They're going to be trying to win these games, and it's good that towards the back end of the season, a lot of these games are basically going to be free because the other team is is actively trying to lose. And we've seen this with the Rockets. The opposite side of this with the Rockets the last few seasons, well, and now we get to be on the good side of it. And there's plenty of teams here that could be intentionally losing. And if when you're fighting for a play-in spot and you're not exactly, I feel like it's going to be a bit of a rude awakening for some Rockets fan, because when we were good, we were very good. We were expecting to win every game we went and played. Now we're going to be good, but I think we're going to be good, but it's probably going to be inconsistent, and we're not going to be, if we're favorites for half the games we play, that'll be, probably a good season. And so looking at the last 4 weeks, you can't go into every game expecting to win, right? So having a lot of these games that are basically going to be free wins is a big deal, because now the only ones that are toss-ups are the other half, And if you win half of the half that's toss-ups, now you've won 75% of your games in the closing month of the season, and that should put you in a pretty good place as far as a play in hand could possibly go. So that's mostly what I'm looking forwards to. Other than that, I mean, it's a schedule, right? Not really
Yeah.
much to talk about.
And also potentially for momentum of the franchise, be it Joel Embiid, maybe it's Zion, maybe someone else declares a crazy situation and gets disgruntled. But we've talked about the Rockets. Embiid is just a template. It could potentially be someone else. The NBA is crazy. Things pop up that you aren't expecting, and the Rockets are fairly well positioned. It's a desirable market. They have lots of young talent. And so as we're heading towards next offseason, a strong finish to the year and perhaps beating expectations, that could also put you in a better light around the league with players and agents thinking that you're on the upswing. And so there's lots of benefits to potentially being able to finish strong and leave a good impression, whether it gets you in the play-in tournament or not. Obviously, that's still going to be an uphill battle with regards to, I haven't seen the over-under yet, and I suspect the Rockets are somewhere in the 30 or slightly above when it comes to expected wins for the year. I think they have a good shot at clearing it, but just in terms of the outside perception. Couple of notes on the schedule before we wind down. So as currently constructed, there's 6 Western Conference teams that they're going to play 3 times instead of the usual 4. The Nuggets, the Warriors, the Clippers, the Kings, the Timberwolves, the Thunder. All of those teams were playing or better last year. In the case of the Nuggets, the Warriors, and the Kings, and maybe the Clippers, you're talking actual West contenders or close to contenders. That's a pretty good draw. You're playing 4 times against the teams that are likely to be really bad, the Trailblazers, the Jazz, the Spurs, and so on and so forth. Now, that's not a done deal because with the in-season tournament, every team has at least 2 games that's going to be added at a later date, somewhere in that December 4th through the 9th window. The reason for that is that the in-season tournament is going to determine who gets to the final 8, the knockout stage, and then the 22 of the 30 teams that are not in the knockout stage, then they're going to get paired against one another. And my guess is that the 2 games for the Rockets, if possible, depending on who's left in that 22, assuming the Rockets don't make it out of their in-season tournament, which shouldn't assume. Maybe they get lucky. But if they don't, then you're probably going to play a couple of those teams as part of that December 4th through the 9th week that you're adding games for teams that did not qualify for the in-season tournament. Also, I want to emphasize something with the in-season tournament. We've talked about it before, but I've seen a lot of confusion when that schedule got released earlier this week, with people thinking there's a ton of volatility depending on how much each team will care for those games, because obviously this is new. In the long run, the NBA wants to be something analogous to some of the cups in European football. But at the end of the day, it's not just the in-season tournament. Not everyone seems to understand that. These are regular season results that are being multi-purposed. The only part of the in-season tournament that will not count towards the regular season is the actual championship game, the final 2. And I think the hope is that if you literally get to the championship game and you're one of the last 2 standing, that'll be enough to incentivize you in and of itself. The other games, though, even if you don't care about the in-season tournament, okay, then they're one of 82 games. And I suppose once in a while, you'll overlook someone, or maybe they'll have a few guys load manage and upsets do happen. But for the most part, the better teams win in the regular season. The NBA is not that unpredictable. And so because of that, I think a lot of people are overestimating the volatility of this play-in tournament, or not play-in tournament, in-season tournament, because they're not looking at it as another regular season game, which on some level it is. So I'll give you an example. The 10th, the Rockets play the Pelicans. I think that's their first play-in tournament game, and they host, or first in-season tournament game. God, I keep mixing those up. Too many tournaments. That's the first in-season tournament game in Houston. And then the 12th, they host Denver, who is actually also in their in-season tournament group, but it's not technically an in-season tournament game. The Rockets Nuggets in-season tournament game is at the end of the month. I believe that's in Denver. I do not expect the Rockets to take that game against the Pelicans and that game against the Nuggets any differently, because one is technically in-season tournament and one isn't. No, they're just one of 82 games. It's no different than anything else. And I think the same is going to be true for other teams. So just want to hit home that when we talk about this in-season tournament, yeah, there'll be a champion that there wasn't before. But in terms of the games throughout, they're going to be one of 82. That's the way that most teams are going to approach it, probably all teams. And so because of that, I don't think you should look at them as any more unpredictable than a normal game on the schedule. Again, a Rockets Nuggets game in November that isn't part of the in-season tournament, I don't think it's going to be that different than a Rockets Nuggets game in November that is a part of the in-season tournament, because both are one of 82. That's the way these teams are going to look at it. The last thing I want to get off my chest as it pertains to the schedule, I've seen a little bit of disappointment that the Rockets only got 4 national TV games, and 3 of those were NBA TV. So if you don't count NBA TV, then you just had the one ESPN game on January 12th at Detroit, 2 teams that are rebuilding along similar timelines, Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green, that being the headliner matchup. And that's a 6:30 game on ESPN. I think it's a Friday night. Look, here's the thing about the Rockets. We're bullish on their future for a good reason, because we study them on a day in, day out basis, and the trajectory of the franchise is pretty good right now. They're definitely on the upswing, but the Rockets are not box office. When the Rockets pivoted from James Harden to Fred VanVleet, look, there are justifiable reasons for it. Fred is a very good player, and he's more plug and play. He's more complementary than James in a lot of scenarios, but he's far less box office. No one buys tickets or stops what they're doing on a weekend night because they've got to see Fred VanVleet play. He's just not that type of player. And when we talk about the young guys, I think San Antonio has 18 or 19 national TV games. Wemby is in a different class than guys like Jalen and Şengün and Amin and Jabari. These are good prospects. People are excited about him. But until they actually deliver at a high level in the NBA, they're just one of many talented young prospects. The Rockets don't have any perceived transcendent guys like Wemby is. So don't take it as a sign of disrespect. It's just the Rockets, the choices they made and where they ended up in the draft lotteries. While I think you can be optimistic about the team they built, at this point, it's not box office. I hope it will be box office, to borrow a Stephen A term, as Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün and hopefully multiple members of your core 6 take the leap. And maybe we're having a different discussion a year from now. Also should note that games can be added to the added and subtracted to the national TV slate during the regular season. So if the Rockets get off to a hot start, then maybe they get more national TV games. But right now, don't take it as a sign of disrespect. Just take it as the reality that the Rockets just don't have that type of a national or global draw based on the roster as currently constructed. We hope that changes, but for now, the Rockets are trying to basically take a team approach. It's not about any one individual, and they're still developing. And so because of that, it's not a shot. It's not that anybody in the league office doesn't like the Rockets. It's just from a box office perspective, they are not a draw yet. We hope that changes. Maybe it does change during the season. And then if that's the case, they'll get a lot more added. And by this time next year, we'll be having a different discussion. But for now, it's not an insult. It's just a reminder that the Rockets, while their situation is promising, it's not to a point yet where people nationally and globally are truly going to take notice. There's still a ways to go. Maybe a Joel Embiid trade can figure into that as well. But for now, based on where things are currently constructed, the 4 national TV games and only 1 ESPN, 0 TNT, that feels about right. Very last point, I know we've run long. Spoiler alert, we always do. That's what we do here at the Logger Line. When we talk about the start to the season being important and why I think that soft schedule opening up is really big for the Rockets, on a player level, the guy I'm watching the most is Jabari Smith Jr. He's a guy, and we talked about it in our recent episode, ranking guys who this season is most important for. And even though you wouldn't necessarily expect a ton from year 1 to year 2, we both had him in our top 5 because just it comes down to timing. His year 1 was a bit underwhelming relative to being number 3 overall. A lot of people expected number 1 overall going into the 22 draft, but he did show some encouraging signs near the end. And now he's coming off this amazing summer league. He has a lot of momentum. He's going to have better pieces around him in the starting lineup. And now game 1, he goes up against Paolo Banchero, the guy who was picked over him high in the 2022 draft, the reigning rookie of the year, the type of guy that, with Paolo's blend of power and athleticism and fluidity, he's the type of guy that Jabari, especially as a rookie, couldn't handle. That's why he's been putting on strength. That's why he's been doing yoga to get more flexible so that he can handle guys like Paolo that have that blend of power and athleticism. I can think of no better spotlight than Paolo Banchero in game one to put some of Jabari's off-season improvements to the test. And then game two against the Spurs and Wemby. And by the way, it's actually the third time they'll play the Spurs in 11 days. They play them twice in the preseason, and that's less than 2 weeks earlier. We know that not only are Wemby and Jabari, like I say, identical position, but they're close to identical position. They'll definitely guard each other a decent bit, I would suspect. And we also know that when Wemby took his shot at the Rockets during the draft lottery, intentionally or unintentionally, we all know the camera shot where he was fist pumping and smiling when the Rockets went at number 4, meaning they weren't going to get him. Jabari was the guy that quote tweeted that video with the taking notes emoji. Clearly, it meant something to him. So for Jabari to get to go against Paolo Banchero, the guy who had a better rookie season than him, the guy that was picked over him, the guy, the type of player that he's developing his body to hold up better against in game one, and then in game two to play Wemby, the guy he said he was taking notes and being ready for. It's an interesting spot for the Rockets as a team because even on the road, these are the types of opponents that they can compete with, and maybe you can argue should be, given the veterans the Rockets brought in the offseason, although I'll try and temper expectations a little bit. Again, they are going to be still learning how to play together in terms of blending the young guys from last year with the veterans they brought in. But in terms of the players themselves, I think it's a perfect stage for Jabari to showcase the growth that we think he's had and to build on the confidence that I'm sure he gained from a strong summer league. He's been in Houston all year. One of the things that little tidbit I'll throw out, the Rockets had a much shorter schedule release video this year than last. One of the reasons for that is that there haven't been that many players and coaches actually in Houston for the majority of the offseason. Two that are Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason. They're in Toyota Center almost every single day. They're bonding with not only the organization, but the community. That's to say the guys that aren't here aren't committed to the same extent. Because again, like Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., they're from California. We know Amin Thompson has a home far outside of Houston. These guys have lives. And, Amin is getting separated from his twin brother for the first time. So they're trying to maximize their time together in the offseason. And Şengün and Dylan Brooks are playing for their national teams in World Cup or pre-Olympic qualifying. Jacques Landale was as well, although he appeared to sprain an ankle today. So hopefully he'll be ready for camp. Still 6 weeks until it starts in early October. But the point, it's not so much the other guys aren't committed. It's more that they just have other things going on, either in their personal lives or international teams that just don't allow them to be in Houston. But two that are in Houston almost every single day are Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason. They're getting ready for a big season. And Jabari in particular, it feels like it's set up on a tee for him to have a really encouraging start for the year. Hopefully he comes through. And with that, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Paolo, any other thoughts before we close this out?
Yeah, it's really unfair that French Bol gets more national TV games than Jalen Green does, but just wanted to put it out there.
I like it.
Impressed.
Well, hopefully Jabari takes that to heart. Yeah, put on the fact that the Spurs have 19 national TV games. Put that on the bulletin board prior to all those Rockets Spurs games and let Jabari take it out on Wemby. He already didn't like him on a personal level after the draft lottery. Now you add this to the fire and hopefully, the whole team can build on that and use it as fuel. But I think Jabari in particular, because he seems to be the kind of guy who, again, uses some of these slights. You can just see it in his interviews. You can see it in how he interacts on social media. He plays with a chip on his shoulder, and he's had momentum, it feels like, for months. Again, you can't make a mountain out of a molehill. It is just 2 games out of 82. But if Jabari comes out and succeeds in those first 2 road games, especially if the Rockets are competitive as a team as well, and Jabari's doing it against the likes of Paolo and Wemby, then that's one of those variables that can all of a sudden have you very optimistic and think that the Rockets are closer than maybe many think around the league to making that leap where they actually are box office. So with that, we will bring this extended episode to a close. And we went on for a while, but A, we always do, and B, there's a lot to get to today between both Joel Embiid, Rockets being a potential suitor in most likely the months ahead, but still the fact that they're in the mix at all is very interesting. We're talking about the MVP of the league. And then, of course, the new schedule for the upcoming season that just got released. So that's why we went a little bit long, had a lot to discuss. Going forward, I expect it to be relatively quiet in the 6 weeks leading up to training camp, but whatever breaks, we will have you covered right here at the Logger Line with Insight. I do expect a new City Edition uniform, by the way, to come out in, sounds like September, and then it will debut, I think, one of the 2 Friday home games during the in-season tournament. So we will have that, and I'll try to get an interview lined up on that front with the guy responsible for designing that new city jersey. But we're going to be trying to get some other interviews as well with people surrounding the Houston Rockets, because even if there's not news going on in terms of developments directly related to the teams and its day-to-day prospects, look, there is a lot of intrigue around what the Rockets did this offseason, where they're trying to go in the future. And so this is a time to sort of catch up, look at things from a 30,000 foot view as opposed to a day to day. And so hopefully with this being a slow period in the NBA calendar as well, this will make it to where it's easier to get in touch with a few people that would love to pick their brains and get some insight on in the weeks leading up to training camp as the Rockets gear up for what could be what we hope is a pivotal season in the trajectory of this franchise moving forward. Anyway, this is enough for one episode. We will have more in the near future. Again, just stay tuned. Before we close out, I do want to throw out our usual plugs. You can follow myself and Paolo on Twitter or X. I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Paolo is on there at Paolo Alves NBA. And the show is on there at The Logger Line, where if you go to the link tree, you can find links to Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire, all our partners, friends, sponsors. You can access their content. You can also go to Apple, Google, Spotify, all the links for this show where you can follow, subscribe, like us, leave a positive review if you have not already. Again, Linktree is the simplest way to do that because we've got everything you need from the distributors to our friends, partners, and sponsors. It's a one-stop shop. Hit up the Linktree, which you can get to at The Logger Line on Twitter or X. I know technically it's X, but God, that's terrible. I'm still going to call it Twitter. Anyway, enough banter for one episode. This is where we will break for today. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening. Go Rockets, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.